wasn't a person that had a business background. I didn't think, oh, I'm going to become an entrepreneur and I'm going to build this, empire. It was really just me doing a hobby and then realizing that I could turn that hobby into something that could make money. And then it was, well, let me see how much money I can make. Maybe whenever I decide to have children, this could be my job, because I used to work in television and film production, and I worked really long hours. So I thought it would enable me to be able to stay home so that, my husband could work, but I could still contribute to the income as well and sort of be a stay-at-home mom, but collect a paycheck at the same time. And I did not know that it was going to grow the way that it did. And, pre-COVID, I was the person that was always on the road, and my husband was at home more because I traveled for business pretty heavily since 2006. But it's been a really great journey. I sometimes call myself the accidental entrepreneur. It's not what I knew I was going to do, but then once I began to do it, I realized that it was my path and that it was for me. And I just had to learn as I went along. I didn't have the luxury of having a plan and having it figured out. As I did it. I learned and I did. I learned and I did.
Yeah. Well, and I think in some ways, that might be the better way to go, because I think what happens is that people get so caught up in the plan. Like, what is the plan? How am I going to do this? And sort of checking the boxes and all the I's, dotting all the I's and crossing the T's, that you've planned too much. And as I know, in my experience as an entrepreneur, is that every day stuff comes at you that you would never have thought about in your plan. It never would have even been there. You could have sat and thought about and meditated on your plan for a year, and you would not know the things that are going to come at you. So
true.
I think maybe it's a little bit of, I always say to people that I think that with entrepreneurship, ignorance is a bliss, because if you don't know, you just kind of go with it. And I do think there's something about the right personality to be an entrepreneur. I think you have to be somebody who can roll with the punches.
Yeah.
And I'm actually curious, and I'm very curious to hear how you think about the failures that come that come along as you're going, because it's very, very rare that everything just goes smoothly. In fact,
absolutely.
I've heard anyone say that.
I used to think that when I would mess up, notice I said when I would mess up, right? That it was my fault. It was because, if I had gone to business school, I probably would have known that and not made that mistake. Or if this was something that I was trained to do, I probably wouldn't have screwed up. And thankfully, I've been able to be in business for 27 years, because now I know the smart people screw up. The people that have all the letters after their name and are in business, they screw up, because it's just the nature of business and the nature of life. And it isn't personal, and it isn't your fault, and the world doesn't end. And if you can, pick yourself up, go back, look at the mistake, see where it happened, how it happened. Could you have avoided it? Maybe not. Is it one of those, it is what it is situations, but then what can you learn from it, and what can you remember from it, so that when you're in that situation again, you might say, wait, hold on. I've been here before. Do I want to do this, or do I want to do that? And you have to stop blaming yourself and saying that it's your fault, because it isn't. Most of the time it isn't.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, that I love how you think about it, the fact that you take the time to reflect. I think that that's one of the things that, we grow up in a system with our school system where failure is feared, right? I mean, you're not supposed to fail.
Right.
You fail a test, you come home and you tell your parents you failed a test. That's not going to go over well. So I
Mm-hmm.
think we are taught to fear failure. And I think the way you're describing how you think about it, which is,
Mm-hmm.
you have to, like, it's going to happen, and you need to actually look at it and think to yourself, what could I have done differently? And, moving forward, how might I change it so that I don't necessarily make that same mistake again?
Exactly. And
So,
yeah, and when you're when you're a Black person in America, your parents also raise you, um, and tell you, I don't know if you were a Scandal fan, but there was a scene where Papa Pope speaks
mhm,
to Olivia, and he says to her, "What did your mother and I always teach you?" And she said that I have to work twice as hard to get half as much.
mhm,
And that's another reality for
mhm,
a person of color, that you feel like you have the responsibility of an entire race.
mhm.
You've got your foot in this door, you're trying to get through the door, and you can't screw it up because you don't know when that door is going to open up again, and you need to get some other people in with you. So you really don't give yourself that grace
Mhm,
to have a mistake,
mhm.
but you're going to have them. So you
Mhm.
have to give yourself that grace.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to, hear a little bit more about your perspective on this, because the statistics are very clear that, first of all, for women, it's more difficult to be running businesses. Women own businesses don't get the same funding as businesses run by men. That is even worse if you are a woman of color, in terms of the percentage of businesses that are venture funded and getting funded.
Mhm.
If your business that is created by a woman of color, talk a little bit, if you can, about how that affected you, and whether, this process of, did you go out and seek funding, or really was this from the ground up, you sort of built it without funding? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I did build from the ground up from 93 until 2003.
Mm-hmm.
And what was happening in 2003 is I began to realize that I was probably at the point where I had done as much as I could do on my own.
Mm-hmm.
By 2003, I had gotten two loans from the bank, um, which at the time seemed like astronomical amounts of money to me. One of them was for 150,000. Another loan was for 200,000. And I realized in 2003, when you get to a place where you have 2 million in sales, there's a lot of overhead that it doesn't exist when you have 300,000 in sales. There's
Mm-hmm.
more risk. There's more employees that have to be taken care of. Um, the tax filings become more frequent, and anything that you need to sort of push the needle forward isn't something that comes from a bank loan, and it isn't something that comes from a really good day on the website. Those would be small increments if you got those things. And so I began to realize that I was going to need some outside help to
Mm-hmm.
grow. I just didn't know what that looked like because, again, I didn't have a business background. So I began to um, have conversations with companies that were interested in looking at the business and seeing if there was any kind of synergy. I had a consultant that I worked with from time to time who took on the task of making those introductions. And then if something were to come of it, then he would get a finder's fee.
Mm-hmm.
Then I began to see like what that process looked like, what the packages that you put together for it, the presentation that you make. Um, and there was always a person there that I had hired to be there, that was speaking to business, speaking to numbers, because that wasn't my proficiency. I understood them,
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't the one that if another accountant in the room began to drill down on things, I might not answer the way that they would need to hear it. So I
Mm-hmm.
always made sure that I had somebody in the room that could address that, so they would know I had somebody working with me that understood numbers. And then I was there to speak to the brand, to the story, to the authenticity,
Mm-hmm.
creative ideas, product development, all of that. Um, and I ended up getting introduced to a person who was new in the advertising and marketing space, had
Mm-hmm.
been in music. His name is Steve Stout. He's an extremely successful business person. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but Steve and I met in 2003. We were introduced through a mutual friend, and he was the person who became the first investor in Carol's Daughter. And what was different about him, when I met with him, and I didn't even know why we were meeting, I just took the meeting because my friend Rhonda said, "Oh no, this guy wants to meet you. You got to talk to him. He's a genius." And what was different was he was an entrepreneur, and he spoke to me like one. He
Mm-hmm.
didn't speak to me like a person who says, "Well, if you want to go to the next level, this is what we're going to need to do. And I need to know that you're prepared," which is what a lot of those other conversations were like. And
Mm-hmm.
they were condescending, and they were a bit intimidating. And, it kind of left you feeling like, well, maybe I'm not ready to go to the next level because I don't even know what that is. You didn't define it. And, so yeah, let's not meet again. But with Steve, he was coming from a place of understanding what it was that I was doing and speaking to me about issues that I was having, as if he knew what issues I was having, but he just knew what they were because he knew what it was like to build something from nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that first conversation, I felt like this is someone that I can keep talking to because he gets it.
Yeah.
And he did end up being an investor in the company. So when it came time to sit in front of people and raise money, what I had as an advantage was having a business partner like Steve.
Mm-hmm.
And he was male. He was African American, but he was male, so that helps.
Mm-hmm.
But then he was also very successful, so
Mm-hmm.
that helped as well. So I didn't encounter that same thing that other businesses encounter because I was able to walk into the room with someone who was already a proven success.
Mm-hmm.
And then men just operate differently in this space than women do.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and it sounds like you he was one of several people who you could have partnered with, but you chose him
Yes.
because you recognized that he himself was an operator. There seems to be this consistency that you have an awareness, and whether it's conscious or it's subconscious, but you have an awareness of what you need, and and a self-awareness. Where does that come? Because I think a lot of other women struggle with that. Do you feel like you have a self-awareness that helps guide you? And if the answer is yes, where do you think that comes from?
I never really thought of it that way. But I think perhaps because I started this at 30, um, it would not have been the same if I started at 20. There
Mm-hmm.
were things that I learned about myself and I learned about life between 20 and 30.
Mm-hmm.
And before becoming an entrepreneur, I shifted careers. I used to work as an executive secretary for Health and Hospitals Corporation, and I left the steady job, the medical benefits, the vacation time, like all those things that you're told to hang on to.
Mm-hmm.
One of those jobs that you can't really get fired from unless you do something really, really bad. I I left that to go into television production. And when I did that, it was a big leap of faith. But I found when I moved into television production that for the first time in my life, I didn't have a job.
Mhm.
I had a career.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I knew for the first time what it felt like to go to work.
Yeah.
Even though the hours were ridiculously long, they were in no
Mhm.
comparison to the 9 to 5 day that I had
Mhm.
before as an executive secretary. But just being able to work on something that you love and to work on something creative.
Mhm.
So I began to learn what was important,
Yeah.
and what was valuable, and that lesson taught me, if you're strict with yourself and if you're honest with yourself, you can figure out how to live on less in exchange for loving what you do.
Mhm.
So it was kind of like preparation for being an entrepreneur. I just didn't realize that that's what was happening at the time.
Yeah.
So I've always tried to move in a way where I understand that success is a part of what we're doing. If you
Yeah.
don't make money, you don't survive. But it's not the only goal. It has to be balanced with peace and happiness and joy. They have to go hand in hand. Even if one takes over for a little while and it's a
Mhm.
little out of balance, I know it's got to get back to
Mhm.
balance.
Yeah. Well, let's take a step back and talk about how you started the company. What inspired you to start it? The name of the company is Carol's Daughter. The name of the brand is Carol's Daughter. Why is it called Carol's Daughter?
It's called Carol's Daughter because that's one of the things that I am. And when I needed to name it, I made a list of things that I was and a list of things that I wanted to become.
Mhm.
And I felt that I would either affirm something positive about myself or I would call into being something that I needed.
Mhm.
And when I read my list back to myself and I said Carol's daughter, I also said Robert's daughter, Hank's secretary, Gordon's girlfriend. Uh,
Wow, what a list.
Carol's daughter gave me like the goosebumps and that like
Mhm.
ooh, that kind of feeling. And I went with the gut and the intuition and the feeling.
Mhm.
Um, and what that ended up becoming was the first time that you listen to that entrepreneur's intuition.
Mhm.
And then the next time you have that moment, and you build on those, and then you begin to know that feeling and know when something is right.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm very, very happy that I did that because my mother was alive for the first part of my business, the first 10 years of my business. And it was one of those ways of giving someone their flowers while they're still here. She didn't
Mhm.
have to wait until she was gone to
Mhm.
then be honored and revered. I was talking about her and the things that she taught me, and named the company after her while she was very, very much alive.
Yeah.
And now when I think of the history of it, surviving losing her,
Mhm.
having the company bear her name was this literal, tangible thing every single
Mhm.
day. When someone passes, people say to you, well, she's not really gone. She's always going to be with you.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, when you're grieving, those just sound like words.
Mhm.
But I literally walked into a building where her face was on the wall and her name is on everything and every piece of paper. And every time you type your email, her name is there. So she really was with me all the
Mhm.
time. And
Mhm.
I felt it. And it's hard to imagine going through that process if my life had been different.
Yeah. Well, what a gift that you gave to your mom. And I know I would imagine that naming your company basically as is sort of the personification of her as a mom
Mhm.
was um a testament to the job she did to raise you, right?
Yeah.
And you wanted to honor that. I mean, honestly, I'm about to cry because I think is such a gift that you gave to her, and also
Yeah.
a legacy
Yes.
that she and you have forever. So um how did so your mom encouraged you, I believe,
Yes,
to
yes.
start the company?
I was making moisturizers in my kitchen as a hobby.
Oh.
I found a book at a new age store in Park Slope one Sunday afternoon, and the book was about essential oil. And I've always been fascinated with fragrance, and I used to blend fragrance oils and make my own scent. And when
Mhm,
I found this book, that's when I began to learn that there are fragrances that are made in labs, and it's a, you know, a science thing and blending of molecules. And then there are essential oils that come from plants and flowers and trees and resins, and I didn't know that before. And then I was learning what essential oils had what types of properties. And the book also had very basic recipes. You know, if you want to make a massage oil, if you want to make a bath oil, if you want to make a balm or a salve. And so I started to gather those ingredients because I grew up with a grandmother that made a grease for our hair when we were little. She always had this camphor solution that she would put on your forehead if you had a headache, a cold, anything. You got this camphor thing on your forehead and you felt better. Um, and so I was fascinated about that and being able to sort of make my own remedies and things. And I always had very dry skin. And I thought to myself, what if I make my own moisturizer? That would be kind of cool. And I
mhm,
just did it as a hobby. And as I would figure out different recipes, I would give it to family and friends. And after doing that for about 2 or 3 years, my mother said, you know, St. Mary's is having a flea market in 2 weeks. You should sell your butter. You should put it in jars and sell it. And I
mhm,
was like, really? You think people would buy it? And she said, yeah, because they're really nice. And
mhm.
then I said, but mommy, what am I going to put them in? I don't have jars, because I just put them in whatever container I had laying around, Tupperware, an old jelly jar, like,
Yeah.
And so my mom had just adopted my baby sister, and she had baby food jars at home. She said,
Mm,
what if I, boil the jars? And recycling had just started in New York. So she had to keep them separate for recycle. She said, what if I don't toss them out? What if we, boil the jars like we used to boil bottles back in the day, get them nice
mhm,
and clean, get the labels off, and then you reuse the baby jars. And that was what I did, the first flea market, recycled
mhm.
baby food jars and labels that I made by hand. And I sold out of the creams at that flea market. And while I was at that flea market, someone handed me a flyer for a craft fair coming up 2 weeks later. And then I did that. And then there was another, oh, there's this other fair on DeKalb Avenue. It's really great. You should check it out. And I did. And I just spent that summer going to different places in Brooklyn and selling on the street.
And then just grew from there.
Mhm.
So what were you like as a child? Were you an entrepreneurial kid? Were you, always interested in doing, maybe there was some inkling that you might be a business owner, but can you talk a little bit about what you were like as a child?
I was not an entrepreneurial kid, but I do remember in 5th grade selling at the bake sale and selling really, really well. And
Mhm.
I didn't think of myself as a salesperson. I just remember my 5th grade teacher being very proud of how much I sold, because the bake sale was for our class. And
Mm.
when other kids didn't sell enough, she would send me out with the tray going around the school, and I would come back with the empty tray and money. And what I realized later was, if I believe in it and
Mhm,
if I really love something, I can sell it.
mhm,
And what I did with that bake sale, most of the stuff was made by her. And Miss
yeah,
Jackman could cook and bake like my grandmother.
mhm,
So I knew when I told somebody that chocolate cake is delicious, those cookies are fantastic, I knew what I was talking about. So I
mhm,
think people felt that authenticity. Um, I didn't know that being in business was something that I would do. And I'm not an extrovert. So I wasn't the type of person that could just walk, like when I did street fairs, I couldn't just walk up to a stranger and say, "Would you like to try my moisturizers?" My husband would usually do that. He would be like, "My
Mm.
wife makes this great stuff. It smells so good." And he would have these little pieces of cardstock that he dipped into my fragrances, and then he would give it to them to smell. And he always said he would catch people by the nose, and then that would get them to come back and look at the table and try the creams and things like that. And once you started to speak to me, then I could talk to you all day long about the ingredients and the products. But I wasn't good at pulling you in.
Mhm.
um, I think I've developed that skill now because I've had to
Mhm.
sell so much now. So if I ever have to do an in-store event, I have no problem walking up to a total stranger. But when I first started, I could not do that.
Why do you think that why do you think it is that now you have that, or later you develop that ability? Is it because you believed in the products and you believed in yourself? Like, what changed?
It's a combination of exercising a muscle,
Mm, mhm.
and then it starts to work
Ah,
and you
yeah.
recognize it. You
Yeah.
don't realize that you have the skill.
Mhm.
And so life kind of forces you to exercise that muscle and use it.
Mhm.
But then it's also confidence, like I don't necessarily step into a situation feeling like I'm the best, there's nobody better than me, my stuff is the greatest. I'm not that kind of confident, but I
Mhm.
also don't walk in feeling like, well, I hope they like it, I hope they buy it, I work so hard, everything smells so good, I really hope they like me. I don't do that anymore.
Mhm.
So I know that when I'm speaking about something, I know the experience that's behind it. I know the time that I've put into it. I
Mhm.
know why I developed it. I know why it works. I know everything about it, and that gives me confidence to say what I have to say to see if you're interested in purchasing it.
Yeah.
And if you're not interested in purchasing it, I've learned to not take that personally, and I
Right.
don't walk away from it feeling like a failure. It
Mhm.
just wasn't for you, and that's
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that I love your explanation for it, that it's a muscle. It's like anything else, that once you work it a bit, it gets stronger.
Mhm.
And then you also couple with that the confidence that
Right.
you gain from, being out there and seeing that people react positively to what you're doing. That helps as well.
Uh-huh.
How how do you think about your mission in life?
When I first, began the brand, I felt that I was coming to women with a different way of looking at beauty. I wasn't coming to you saying, "You have issues, you have problems, and you need to buy my stuff to fix those problems."
Mhm.
I came to them with simple things that they could incorporate into their life to feel better.
Mm.
Did you know what could happen if you put rose oil on after your shower? What that feels like on your skin, what it feels like when you smell it. Um, I remember being not a young mother because I wasn't, 20 something. I was in my 30s. But when I first became a mom, I had one child and then I had the second child 19 months later.
Mm.
So, and I was building a business. So
Mhm.
when I had time in the shower where no one else came into the bathroom and interrupted me, I probably had anywhere from 5 to 7 minutes, and whatever I could do in that 5 to 7 minutes to escape, to relax,
Mm.
just gave me so much peace.
Mhm.
Having something on me scented, and then I would go into doing work, and I would always have old bummy clothes on because beeswax would spill on me, shea butter would spill on me, something would be on my hands, and I would just wipe it off on my clothes and get back to working. So I looked like a mess, but if I put my head inside of my clothes and could smell, I smelled like a goddess. And it would just like, okay,
Mhm.
you look insane, but you're still a goddess. You're still powerful. You're still strong. And I just wanted other women to feel that way about themselves.
Mhm.
As the business became successful and I became this person that was this inspiration to other business owners, this
Mhm.
person that they looked at and they said, well, maybe I can do what she did. Then I
Mhm.
realized that my responsibility shifted somewhat to not just be about beauty, but to also be that person that says, you don't have to have a degree from Wharton to be an entrepreneur.
Right.
You don't have to have, all of this amazing education and confidence and money and all of these things. You just need the passion and the desire to do what it is that you want to do. And now I feel like my mission is to continue doing that and figure out how I can mentor other women,
Mhm.
um, to just make those leaps and to believe in themselves. I noticed that men tend to raise their hands for things they have no experience doing. They're like, I'll figure it out. I'll learn how to do it. A really dear friend of mine, um, that my husband and I have known now for 30 years, when we met him, he was a driver on a television show that we all worked on. He
Mhm.
was fresh out of college. He did not know New York at all. And when he interviewed for the job, he was going to be the wardrobe runner for the show. So one of the questions that they asked him was, do you know the city? Do you know Manhattan? Because you're going to need to be able to get all around and get back here quickly. And you can't use public transportation. You're going to have to use the car because you're going to be carrying too much stuff.
Mhm.
Oh, no. Yeah, I know New York like the back of my hand, no problem. He got that job and went and bought every map he could find and started driving all around the city, and he taught himself Manhattan.
Mhm.
That's just not something that women, that girls are raised to do. We're raised to be more cautious. And
Mhm.
if I had been in that same interview, I would have been like, oh no, I just moved here from Maryland,
Right.
but I'm sure I could figure it out. And he was just like, I got it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it is definitely true. I think there's a statistic that men on average will apply for a promotion, a higher level job
Yeah.
when they're 60% qualified, and women wait until they are more like 100% qualified to actually apply for that job. And it is, to your point, maybe it is because we're raised to be more cautious in terms of how we approach the world.
Mhm.
Um, how you talk about your responsibility, or it sounds like you feel like you have this responsibility you take very seriously to help other female entrepreneurs along the way.
Mhm.
You're also and I'm assuming that this is pretty broadly that you think about women, but also women of color. You are a just such a successful example for them, for everybody, for women like me as an entrepreneur, for different women to see that, oh, here's somebody who started this really on, from nothing and have built it up. In 2014, you sold your business to
Mhm.
the largest beauty brand in the beauty company in the world, right? L'Oreal.
Mhm.
And you've just had, objectively, you've had so much success. What what do you do? How do you think about, now as this role model, what you can do to help other women, other female entrepreneurs, other women of color who are entrepreneurs do the same thing?
Well, I don't encourage people to do the same thing because everyone's path is different and not
Mhm.
everyone's business is going to be a business that follows the same path mine did.
Mhm.
And everyone's happiness is different as well. And everyone's definition of success is also different.
Mhm.
So I always encourage people to lean into what their path is, and they can use someone else's story, um, life, uh, tips and things like that as guidance
Mm-hmm.
to ultimately get to where they need to go.
Mm-hmm.
And I always feel a responsibility to being as transparent as possible. You know, if I post something, like for example, the jacket that I'm wearing, if I posted a picture of myself today, I'm going to tag the woman whose company this is, who made this jacket. But I'm also going to make sure that I say in my caption, this is not an ad, because
Mm-hmm.
I don't want people to think that because I'm successful, people send me stuff for free and
Mm-hmm.
then I say something about it. No, I support small business. These bracelets came from a Black woman owned small company. These earrings came from a Black woman owned business. This jacket, the pants that I have on that you can't see. And it's just how I live my life and how I function, because I remember being that woman at the flea market and at the craft fair and at the gift expo, hoping that I would sell, hoping that I would make money, hoping that I wouldn't be in the hole at the end of the day. I am a sucker in a artist's marketplace. I can't walk through and not purchase. I just can't,
Mm-hmm.
because I know what it's like to be that person on the other side, and I know how important every single sale is. And I also want people to not think that I'm successful because I figured everything out. I never made a mistake. I was never afraid. I always had all the money that I needed. I never hired the wrong person. I never was lied to. I never had legal issues. I never had a tax problem. Like, these are all
Mm-hmm.
parts of business. And
Mm-hmm.
you figure it out, and you get a lawyer, and you help, go with your accountant and say, okay, how do we tackle this bill, and why are they auditing these 2 years? Is everything okay? And then you realize that everything is really okay. You didn't screw up. You didn't make a mistake. It's just business. It's just, this is just what it looks like, and you can get through it. And I don't think people hear that enough. And I know that Black women don't hear it enough, because there just aren't enough of us out there
Mm-hmm.
talking to each other. When I did this, I really felt like I was alone. And I love that today we have social media, because you feel like you're in a community. You can find other people that do what you do. And I was the weird chick melting cocoa butter on her stove. Like, I was the person my family was worried about. Like, what is she doing now?
They're not worried anymore, are they?
No, they're not. They're like, that's my cousin.
That's so. Of all of the things you've accomplished, what are you most proud of?
Whew. Well, I'm super, super proud of my family and my children and my siblings, and that, keeping that intact, um, and keeping that at the forefront of everything that I do is super important. And I'm really, really proud of myself for pushing through, not giving up, believing in myself, um, because the person that I became, being an entrepreneur, is so much different than the person I was when I first started this process.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing feeling to remember being terrified of something and then doing it.
Yeah.
Like, I used to be terrified about going on HSN when I first went on HSN to sell. My first show was 15 minutes long. I had been on television before. I understood what I was doing. I worked in television production. The mics worked. I knew how the lights worked, but I had never sold live on TV. And I was so afraid. And then each time that I did it, there was less and less fear.
Yeah.
And I learned how to do it tired. I learned how to do it sick. The light comes on the camera, and it's like, hi, how are you today? Like, you turn into this other person. and it's another skill. It's another
Mhm.
muscle that you don't know you have
Mhm.
until you start exercising it and working it.
Mhm.
And I just don't know how I would have discovered all of those things. So sometimes I feel most proud of the person I've become.
Mm. That's one. I mean, it's just such a great way to think about it because it's a journey, right? It's not just this thing at the end. It's not just getting this prize at the end. It's the journey along the way and how it
Mhm.
affects you as a person. What do you think your personal superpower is?
Mm. I think it's my ability to love. And
Mm,
I hope that other people see that. And I hope that that is something that I've gotten from my mother, because it was absolutely my mother's superpower. I
mm,
watched my mother love sick animals back to life, dead
wow.
plants back to life,
Mm,
and even sick children to healthy.
mm,
and and it wasn't medical because she didn't have that kind of background, but
mhm.
she would talk to her plant, like she would have something that somebody gave her. "Oh, Carol, I tried to grow this thing and it's dying." And my mother would take it and she'd repot it and she'd talk to it and she'd say good morning. And I would be looking at her like, my mother's talking to the plants. She's crazy. Like, what is she doing? And then, it would be a 5-foot tree. Like, and it was a piece of nothing.
Yeah.
So I am not a green thumb. Do not give me a plant. I will kill it. But I can love other things
Mm.
into existence, and I that's the skill that I develop, and I think it is my superpower, and hopefully I can be half as good as my mom was at it.
Well, I mean, she sounds like just an amazing person. Just the idea as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, like very visually, her actually pouring love into these things and how when you pour love into something,
Mhm.
that's dying maybe, right? These plants, the kids that were sick, the animals that were sick, it what that does, just that virtue of the love, giving it love, put
Mhm.
aside the medicine, how that can revive something. It's just
Yeah.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
Um, well, I know I so appreciate the time that you've spent talking to us today. I mean, you are such an inspiration, and
Thank you.
um, if people want to find you, to follow you, what is the best way that they can do that?
On Instagram, that's my medium, and my handle is I am Lisa Price, and the brand has its own handle, Carol's Daughter, of course. Um, I manage my own account. That's mine, and the company has other people that manage it, but I'm involved in it, very much so, and like all of the posts, and sometimes repost the brand, and sometimes they repost me. But that's my medium, and that's where I express myself the most. Occasionally I'm on Twitter, but Instagram is it.
Well, Lisa, thank you so much for spending the time to talk to us today. I know that women are going to find your story inspirational, and you're a gift. You're a gift to those that get to hear your story and get to engage with your product. So, thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you. Thank you. This was a great conversation.